Let me give you some background. I used to work in tech support for a phone company a few years ago. Sometimes, we'd send customers free stuff like chargers as a kind gesture. It was totally up to us, we didn't have to do it, but we could if we wanted to. We'd also keep records of our calls and ask customers for their contact info and product details so we could help them better. Then I got a call from a customer who was clearly upset from the start. He was angry because someone had promised him free chargers for his trouble, but he hadn't received them yet. He demanded that I send them to him right away. I asked for his phone number and email so I could look into it, but he refused. He said he didn't want us to store any of his personal information and demanded that I delete all the data we had about him, citing GDPR rules. I explained, "But sir, I need some information to help you. Without it, I can't check if we promised you a charger or delete any data." He started using inappropriate language and called me unprofessional. Then he gave me his name and address, which I wrote down in a temporary note not in our official system, since he didn't want us to store his information. He was surprisingly fine with me taking temporary notes, and I didn't find any matching information in our system. He insisted that I send him the chargers for free and delete all his information immediately after the call. I agreed, and we ended the call. I followed through on our agreement and deleted the temporary notes I had taken. Unfortunately, that meant I no longer had his name or address, so I couldn't send him the chargers after all. It's a bit of an anticlimax, really. I never heard from him again, so he probably tried his luck with other companies demanding free things. But me, I still chuckle when I think about that conversation. It's a memory that puts a smile on my face. Story 2. I work for a big company that provides cable internet, TV, and home phone services. You might know us as the one that gets a lot of complaints. I'm part of the team that tries to resolve issues with customers and either saves their accounts or cancels their services. I received a call transferred from our tech support team. The customer had already been on the phone for an hour by the time I got it. The tech agent had managed to get their service up and running again, but now the customer was asking for a big credit refund for 1 day of lost service. As soon as I answered the phone, the customer started making demands. He said, "Here's what you're going to do, and if you can't do this, then turn my service off right now." I don't want to be a customer anymore. I tried to stay calm and explained that I couldn't give him a credit of over $200 for just 1 day of service, but I could offer a more reasonable credit. He refused and again demanded that his service be turned off immediately. I repeated back to him, "You want it turned off immediately, right now," and he confirmed, "Yes, right now." So I did exactly what he asked and turned off all his services right then and there. He started yelling, I was watching something, and what am I supposed to do without internet? I calmly reminded him that I was just doing what he had demanded. In the end, I turned his service back on and gave him a credit that was fair for the 1 day outage, which we discovered was actually caused by something he had done wrong on his end. Story 3. Okay, so I used to work at a government facility a few years ago. At the time, the place was going through a huge change because a lot of the employees were retiring. Since the facility only hired a bunch of new people every 15 years or so, it was a big deal. One of the new hires, who we'll call E, was brought in to replace the head of the training department. While he was training for the new role, he was given the title of Deputy Department Manager. The new deputy manager, E, turned out to be the most arrogant person I'd ever met. He was always looking for excuses to reprimand people and talk down to anyone with a lower title. As soon as he took over, he changed the way we did training and took control of the hiring process, even though it already had strict requirements, like needing a top secret clearance. He wanted to micromanage every detail, which made no sense since the process was already thorough. I was already in training when E took over, and it was a long process that could take up to 3 years to finish. But E had a grudge against people in my group who didn't fit his idea of perfect. One day, we all started getting called into a meeting with the department head, HR, and E, one by one. I knew something was up because the people getting called in were the ones E had been trying to get rid of. So I decided to take a stand and pulled E aside to talk to him before my turn came up. I approached E and said, "Hey, I have a feeling I know what's going on, but I want to be prepared. Are you guys planning to write us up for something? If so, can you tell me what incident you're referring to? I want to make sure I understand what I did wrong." E responded, "I'm not allowed to discuss that with you. According to the employee handbook, only your direct manager can talk to you about disciplinary actions. And as deputy manager, I'm not your direct supervisor, so I can't say anything more." Next, I was called into the meeting, and sure enough, they were issuing mass write-ups for things we'd already been disciplined for in the past. Apparently, E had convinced HR that bundling all the offenses into a single write-up would make it easier to keep track. But what this really did was reset the clock on many of the previous write-ups, which would have otherwise expired after a year. This place had a policy of only being able to hold a write-up against you for termination purposes for a maximum of 1 year. In the meeting, I faced the department head, HR, and E, who had a smug grin on his face. I turned to HR and asked, "Why is E here?" They replied that he was there to observe. I questioned, "But doesn't the handbook state that only my direct supervisors and HR can attend these meetings?" I expressed my discomfort with E's presence and requested that he leave. HR agreed with me, and E's demeanor changed instantly as he was asked to leave. Without him there, I was able to explain why the new write-up was invalid and violated the handbook. The department head seemed unaware or pretended to be that we had already been written up for these offenses. In the end, all the write-ups for everyone were dismissed. This made me the #1 target for E, who eventually got me fired a couple of years later. But before that, I managed to get him demoted. Summary: my deputy manager tried to write me up for past offenses I'd already been reprimanded for. He refused to discuss the matter with me, citing that he wasn't my direct supervisor. I used this same rule to have him removed from the meeting he scheduled, and without him, the write-ups were dismissed as he couldn't defend his case. Story 4. I'll never forget how inconsiderate my brother could be. I had a rare free day, and I was looking forward to relaxing at home and cooking a late lunch or dinner. But then my phone rang at 4:30 p.m. It was my brother, and he immediately demanded that I drop everything to pick him up from work. He said, "You have to pick me up, can you believe it?" He was only 18 at the time and didn't have his own car or license yet. He just assumed I'd be at his beck and call, even though it was a busy weekend for the rest of our family. My brother's job was all the way on the other side of town, a good 30 to 40-minute drive away, depending on the traffic. And to make matters worse, it was already 4:30 p.m., just before the chaotic rush hour traffic at 5 p.m. I knew that if I said no to picking him up, he would have called our parents and complained until they guilt-tripped me into doing it anyway. But as I thought about this, a sneaky grin spread across my face. I had a plan, and I was ready to take control of the situation. So, what did I do? I went to pick him up, but I didn't take him straight home like he expected. Instead, I made 3 detours along the way, and each one was a deliberate pause. 3 long, slow stops. Let's just say my brother wasn't happy about it, but I was enjoying the little game I was playing. The first stop was at a gas station where I needed to fill up anyway. My brother couldn't complain since he was stuck with me as his only ride. The second stop was at Tijuana Flats, a restaurant I wanted to try. I decided to eat inside, and my brother threw a fit. He kept saying I should get takeout and that we were almost home. He whined about wasting time and claimed he had homework to do, but I knew the truth. That homework would take him only 10 minutes, and then he'd spend the rest of the evening playing video games and watching TV before dozing off. My brother's complaints reached new heights when he called Grandma to tattle on me. She ended up calling me to ask if I had offered to buy him food at the restaurant, which I had. She essentially told him to stop whining, saying, "You wanted a ride, you got it finally." We made our 3rd stop at a supermarket just 4 miles from home. I needed to pick up a few essentials, and my brother was forced to wait even longer. When we finally arrived home around 6:15, 6:20 p.m., My brother unleashed a flurry of complaints to our parents, grandma, and dad. But when dad got home from work, he just burst out laughing, gave me a high five, and said, "Why didn't I ever think of that?" I replied with a grin, "Hey, maybe next time I'll come along and we can make a few extra stops together." It was a small victory, but it felt great to have my dad's approval and support. Yes, my brother's habit of demanding rides without even saying please had been getting on everyone's nerves for a while. It was like he thought he was entitled to a chauffeur service or something. That's why my little act of revenge was so satisfying. It was a long time coming. 12/7, 6:45 a.m. Meta AI. Here's a rewritten version of the final part in the first person using simple and familiar language. In short, my brother bossed me around, demanding a ride without even saying please. But I took my sweet time, making a few extra stops along the way. It was a small payback for his constant demands, and it taught him a lesson he wouldn't forget.